Hey guys, tonight we're taking a sleepwalk into the shadowy corners of ancient Mesopotamia, where the stars blink low over flat rooftops and the Tigris murmurs just beyond the city walls. You're in Babylon now, a place of baked mud brick, alleys, flickering oil lamps, and the soft pad of sandals over stone. You're not here for sightseeing, though. Tonight, you've been summoned to witness something oddly ordinary and utterly strange, the reading of a sheep's liver to predict the weather. In a city where gods meddle in farming schedules and the future drips off the edge of a sacrificial table, this is how things are done. Forget Doppler radar. Here, your best forecast is found in the wobbly glisten of a freshly removed organ. You probably won't survive this, by the way. There's heat, sand, some mild curses flying around in Akkadian, and possibly a rain god in a bad mood. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the temple quarter, the hem of your tunic catching in the dust as early stars blink overhead. Somewhere, incense coils in lazy spirals clinging to the walls of ziggurat. The scent is heavy, cedar resin, crushed myrrh, and maybe goat? Up ahead, two torchbearers wait by a courtyard gate. You're waved in without a word. They know why you're here. Everyone knows. Tonight, the bārû, the diviner priest, is preparing to read the liver of a lamb, to ask the gods a very human question. Will the rain come? The city is tense. Crops depend on this. Travel depends on this. Trade, taxes, marriage plans. Even who eats meat and who eats gruel next month. Inside the courtyard, it's quiet. A square platform rises in the center, lined with silver bowls, linen cloths, and two stone basins. In one, water reflects the firelight. In the other, well, let's just say it's not for hand washing. Standing beside the altar is the bārû, draped in white, hair bound in a leather cord. His face is unreadable, possibly because he's memorizing 57 omen formulas. Or maybe he just had a lot of lentils. This man isn't a priest like the ones you're used to. No sermons, no hymns. He's more like a cosmic accountant, logging divine signs, checking them twice, and hoping the gods don't throw a celestial tantrum mid-process. Historians still argue whether the bārû really believed the gods spoke through livers, or if this was just a high-drama tool for manipulating royal decisions. Either way, it's not a small role. This guy has whispered to kings and terrified farmers alike. A soft bleating breaks the silence. The lamb is led in, small, white, recently bathed, and probably wondering why its day started with such promise and is ending in a cloud of frankincense and existential dread. You're not here to watch the gruesome parts, so don't worry. Let's fast forward past the ceremonial chants, the ritual blade, the offering of bread and beer to the god Shamash, and the rather unpleasant squelch that comes next. Now the bārû cradles the liver like a rare book. It's warm, slick, and glistening under the torchlight. He turns it gently, inspecting every lobe, crease, and blemish. To you, it looks like a blob. To him, it's a message. The courtyard smells of earth, ash, and something faintly metallic. Somewhere, a flute winds its lonely melody through the corridor. This is not theatre, not exactly, but it's not science either. It's a dance between hope and pattern, where a god might choose to reveal himself in a wrinkle near the gallbladder. even if you're skeptical. It's hard not to feel something in this moment. Not reverence, maybe, but a deep human hunger to know, to ask the clouds for mercy, to feel like you have a vote in what the sky will do tomorrow. The priest leans closer, muttering in a rhythm older than most cities. His fingers trace the hepatic duct, his lips forming the sacred names of winds, rivers, and rain. Somewhere deep in the city, a jackal howls, or maybe it's just a sleepy dog with indigestion. You can't be sure, but this moment, this odd hush, around a glistening organ, is where the weather begins. Not in the sky, not in the river, but in the belly of a creature who, just this morning, was nibbling barley by the riverbank. It's not a perfect system, but it's their system. And in Babylon, where the stars seem to hover just low enough to be caught in a fisherman's net, that's enough to make people sleep a little easier. You're still in the courtyard, warm stone under your sandals, the scent of burning juniper curling lazily into the night. The priest hasn't looked up once. His eyes are fixed on the liver, like he's reading a letter from the gods written in invisible ink and animal fat. The Babylonians believed that the gods didn't speak in thunder or burning bushes. No, that would be too dramatic. Instead, they preferred subtlety. Bumps, grooves, color variations, tiny clues like divine breadcrumbs hidden inside the most unsuspecting of places, a sheep's liver. You might be wondering, why a liver? Why not the spleen or the kidneys or something less slippery? Well, to the ancient Mesopotamians, the liver was the seat of life. Forget your romanticized heart metaphors. If you said, "I love you with all my liver" back then, it meant something. The liver filtered blood, the essence of existence. So naturally, if a god wanted to make an announcement, say, about the upcoming flood season, he'd use the organ with the most clout. There's a clay tablet, cracked and worn, sitting in a museum today that reads something to the effect of, "If the liver is smooth and red like fresh dates, there will be rain. If it is pale like gypsum, there will be famine." That's paraphrased, of course. The original is in Akkadian and much harder to whisper at bedtime. Historians still argue whether the symbolism was rooted in years of practical observation or purely religious interpretation. Some scholars suggest the Babylonians may have noticed correlations between a lamb's internal organs and environmental health. Maybe a liver spotted with disease hinted at bad grazing conditions, signaling drought. Others say, nope, it was all divine drama and no biology. Just ancient guesswork with flair. Either way, the people believed. Farmers would delay planting, merchants would hold off shipping dates, and generals would even postpone battles depending on how squishy the divine meat looked that day. That's some serious organ-based influence. Tonight's lamb liver has a curious ridge running along the right lobe. You squint, it kind of looks like a wave or a fishbone. The bārû notes it with a slow nod. He presses gently near the gall. Bladder and hums under his breath. Beside him lies a small wooden box containing wax tablets and a delicate stylus. He'll record this reading soon, scratching notes into soft wax that will eventually be copied into clay. Every liver matters, each one added to a growing archive of divine signs. You're basically watching the earliest version of a weather app being updated live. With meat, you shuffle a little closer, trying not to disturb the ceremonial hush. There's no electricity here, no hum of machines, just the occasional hiss of firewood and the rhythmic chanting of temple assistants. It's weirdly soothing, like standing at the edge of something ancient, where the universe still whispers in strange, meaty syllables. The priest begins to speak aloud now. His voice is soft but deliberate, as if trying not to startle the gods. He describes what he sees. In poetic code, the path of the storm god is veiled, the river mouth is closed, the twin mounds are open. You glance around, no one looks confused. You, on the other hand, are still trying to figure out if twin mounds refers to clouds or spleens. The priest's assistant, a younger man with wide eyes and ink-stained fingers, scribbles the pronouncement into a ledger. You catch a glimpse of his wax tablet, covered in small triangles and wedges, the cuneiform of dreams and omens. Behind you, a small crowd is forming. A few local farmers lean on walking sticks, whispering among themselves. One of them gestures toward the sky. Even the sheepdog nearby seems to be listening, ears perked. Weather is everything in Babylon, not just a daily inconvenience, but the difference between plenty and panic. If the rains don't come, canals dry, wheat withers, and people go hungry. So yes, people will absolutely gather in a courtyard at twilight to hear what a glistening sheep liver might say about next Thursday. Oddly enough, this wasn't just fringe superstition for back-alley mystics. This was state-sanctioned procedure. The divination was commissioned by temple officials, sometimes even by the king himself. These weren't guesses. These were policies. You lean against a sun-warmed column, watching as the liver is gently placed in a shallow silver dish. It will rest there until the assistant finishes recording every observation, no matter how small. Even a wrinkle near the caudate lobe could change the meaning entirely. The priest finally stands upright and closes his eyes. For a moment, he's perfectly still. You imagine he's visualizing the god Adad, Stormbringer and dispenser of thunder. Perhaps Adad is smiling tonight, or perhaps he's just watching from the clouds, amused that humanity is trying to read his mind through mutton. A soft bell rings, signaling the end of the reading. The assistants begin to clean the area, pouring water over the stones, wiping. Down the altar, with linen cloths soaked in palm oil. The liver, no longer sacred, is carefully removed. You don't ask where it goes next. As you prepare to leave the courtyard, the priest raises a hand in your direction. "Rain," he says, simply. "In 3 days." His tone is calm, but you can feel the ripple it sends through the onlookers. Somewhere, a farmer exhales in relief. A merchant scratches out one travel plan and inks in another. You're just trying to remember what day it is. And that's how you learn the forecast in Babylon. Not from a screen, but from the shimmering whispers of a sheep's liver offered to the sky like a question wrapped in flesh. The courtyard has emptied now, but your mind lingers, caught on the glint of that liver, the odd shape of it, the priest's face frozen in careful focus. You walk slowly back through the temple quarter, where the sandstone walls hum with the heat of the day, and the moon casts soft silver light on reed mats left to dry. You've seen the outcome, but what came before it? How did they pick the lamb? Was it a matter of chance? Or did the gods already decide which creature's insides would speak loudest? Turns out, even the sheep selection had its rituals. Earlier that day, before the reading, priests visited a flock raised specifically for divination. Yes, sheep born and bred to spill their guts in service of meteorology. These weren't just any sheep. They had to be spotless, literally. No blemishes, no limps, no strange coloured eyes. A perfect lamb, unknowing prophet of atmospheric conditions. The priest, wearing a headband to signify ritual purity, and a slightly grim expression that said, "Please don't sneeze on the sacred animal," would inspect each one. They'd check the hooves, teeth, eyes, and yes, even the general attitude. A cranky sheep, omen void. A sneezy one, suspicious. Historians still argue whether temperament was recorded in the omen logs, but if you've ever tried herding an uncooperative lamb, you'd be tempted to mark it down as a bad sign too. The chosen sheep was then bathed, not scrubbed with lavender soap, this isn't a spa, but carefully rinsed in a shallow basin of river water. The process was meant to cleanse both body and spirit. The lamb, possibly wondering if it had accidentally signed up for the Mesopotamian Olympics, was then anointed with oil and wrapped in a ceremonial cloth. You imagine the poor creature trotting through the temple corridors, flanked by humming priests and burning incense, like some fluffy VIP who was about to be told what tomorrow's weather would be, from the inside out. And don't forget the offerings. Before the sacrifice, loaves of barley bread were laid on reed mats alongside jugs of date beer and plates of dried figs. The gods were expected to enjoy a snack before answering humanity's rather nosy questions. After all, even divine beings think better on a full stomach. These rituals weren't just pageantry, they were the warm-up act for the main event, setting the stage for divine communication. Every step was precise, layered with symbolism. The sheep represented more than just livestock. It stood in for the person or community asking the question. Its death was a way of transferring anxiety to the heavens. You're standing now beside a small irrigation canal, its edges worn smooth by sandals and time. You watch the water swirl, remembering the moment when the priest removed the liver, wrapped it in clean linen, and placed it on a silver tray. But here's a detail they don't tell you in most history books. Before the divination could begin, the priest would actually recite a specific spell, often translated roughly as, "Let this sheep's liver be as a mirror to the gods." Yes, a mirror, reflecting the will of divine beings through, well, wobbly anatomy. Sometimes, just to make sure everything was spiritually in order, a second lamb would be sacrificed as a backup. This wasn't about indecisiveness, it was about redundancy. You'd be amazed how many ancient spreadsheets were written in blood, one odd fringe detail. In some rare cases, the sheep liver was burned after the reading, not for disposal, but as a way of releasing the god's message into the air. Some believe this was done when the reading was especially dramatic or uncertain, a form of mystical data encryption, if you will. And here's the twist. Sometimes the priests didn't wait for a problem to arise. They would conduct regular liver readings like divine weather updates. Tuesday? Let's check the liver. Need to know if the river will rise. Better find a sheep. It's your turn to host the harvest festival. Might be worth a little peek inside a lamb first. You'd think the people might get skeptical after a few wrong calls. You know, like, the gods said rain, and now I have 6 carts of spoiled dates. But remarkably, the system held up. Why? Because if the forecast failed, it was rarely the gods' fault, it was the humans. Clearly the ritual hadn't been perfect. The question was asked improperly. The sheep had a secret blemish. The assistant scratched the wrong sign into the wax tablet. Blame trickled downhill, usually toward the lowest-ranked scribe or, occasionally, a rival temple. Convenient, if slightly unfair. Still better than blaming the rain god directly. No one wanted a vengeful Adad on their case. You stroll past a bakery now where someone is stacking reed baskets full of flatbread. The smell is grounding. Yeast and ash and the kind of earthy sweetness that makes you wonder whether weather divination was just a glorified way of deciding how many loaves to bake. But as the night air cools and the torches burn lower, you understand something deeper. This was about control. In a world of floods and droughts, unpredictable skies and fickle rivers, the Babylonians found a way to ask questions. And more importantly, they found a way to pretend they could hear the answers. Was it always right? No. Was it comforting? Absolutely. You head back toward the temple steps, the stone warm under your feet. In a few hours, the sun will rise, the irrigation ditches will glisten, and merchants will shout their prices in the morning market, and somewhere a sheep will be chosen to help explain it all. The sky begins to lighten at the edges, soft streaks of lavender and pale gold brushing the horizon. You're already awake, because in Babylon, even dreams take their cues from temple routines. And this morning, like most others, begins with murmured prayers, warm water splashed on your face, and the faint bleating of sheep from somewhere just beyond the courtyard wall. You find yourself wandering toward the clay archive room, an unassuming space tucked behind the main shrine, where history isn't written on scrolls, but baked into tablets. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, line the wooden shelves. You trail your fingers along a row labeled simply with wedge marks and dividers. Somewhere among them are the official records of last night's liver. This is where the real nerds of the temple work, the scribes. And let's be honest, you probably fit in here more than you do with the chanting priests or the bread offering crowd. The scribes don't chant, they squint, they scratch wax with a stylus, they double-check signs for spelling errors that no one else would notice. It's the ancient version of being the guy who fixes your Wi-Fi. One scribe, a young man with a crooked hairline and very organized wax tablets, looks up at you. Looking for something specific? He asks, in a voice so flat it could be mistaken for sarcasm or genuine politeness. You can't tell. You admit you're curious about the liver readings, how they're logged, how they're compared. He gestures toward a stone bench. We've got 20 years of sheep guts in here. Grab a tablet. You do? What you're holding is surprisingly
heavy. The cuneiform is neat, tight, and unwavering, like someone really wanted the gods to read their handwriting. You make out words like storm, northern sky, and oddly enough, frog-shaped discoloration.
That last one is underlined twice. Apparently, these tablets didn't just record what the priests saw, they included diagrams, yes, ancient weather doodles. Picture a liver, flattened like a geography textbook, with tiny notes pointing to landmark, like evil mark, favorable channel, and uncertain vein. It's like Google Maps, but instead of traffic updates, it tells you when your barley might rot. Historians still argue whether these liver diagrams were drawn from observation or copied from a set of standard templates. Some think priests simply mapped the same ideal liver shape every time, marking deviations like anomalies on a radar screen. Others believe each liver was unique and recorded individually, creating a growing database of divine feedback. You pause at a tablet dated during the reign of King Samsu-iluna, around 1740 BCE. The reading says, if the apex of the lobe resembles the prow of a boat, rain will come by dusk. Someone's carved a faint boat shape next to the text, complete with a little wavy line underneath. It's charming, really. Like the gods decided to doodle in the margins. The scribe beside you raises an eyebrow. That one predicted a flash flood. Was accurate, too. Washed half the barley stalls into the Ishtar Canal. You ask whether the priests ever made predictions about things other than weather. He nods. All the time. Military outcomes, royal marriages, crop disease, price
of sheep.
If it could go wrong, someone was slicing open a lamb about it. Of course, the liver was only one part of Babylonian divination. There were celestial signs, dream interpretation, even the occasional oil-in-water reading for those in a hurry. But liver readings were special. They had weight. They were tied to the gods in a deeply visceral way, quite literally. Sometimes, you're told, A prediction would match so perfectly that the tablet was stored in a special archive, reserved for confirmed omens. These were the sacred receipts of successful guesswork. And if the prediction failed, well, that tablet might mysteriously go missing. After all, even in ancient times, no one liked keeping bad Yelp reviews. You step away from the shelves and sit on a mat woven from date palm fibers. The temple walls around you are cool to the touch, their surface etched faintly with protective glyphs. Somewhere outside, a cart rattles past, carrying amphorae of grain and sweet wine. You can hear children laughing and a dog barking at something that probably doesn't care. As the city stirs to life, you begin to notice the rhythms of it, how everything flows in cycles, solar, lunar, seasonal. The priests aren't trying to predict chaos, they're trying to keep up with pattern. It's soothing, really, how much attention they pay to repetition. It makes you feel like maybe, just maybe, someone's in charge. Back in the archive room, another scribe is making a clay impression of a new liver diagram. He's muttering under his breath, something about twin folds and shadow lines. You recognize the terminology from last night. The reading is being immortalized. He looks up and says, "You know what they say? The gods speak softly, but the liver shouts." You both laugh quietly. It's not a great joke, but in this room of ancient data and soft torchlight, it works. Before you leave, you take one last look at the tablet you'd been examining. It has a strange little note scratched into the corner, almost like an afterthought. Sheep bleated twice, marked it down, might mean something. No one knows if it ever did. You step out of the archive and into the warm, waking city. Babylon stretches around you, a slow-moving mosaic of mud-brick houses, reed-roofed stalls, and dusty courtyards. The scent of bitumen, sun-warmed grain, and morning bread wafts from the alleys. You're not sure if it's hunger or curiosity guiding your feet now, but they carry you toward the ziggurat, towering over the skyline like a great, tiered mountain. You climb slowly, each step of the ziggurat wide and shallow, designed for processions and ceremony rather than speed. The view expands with every level. Temples, granaries, and gardens unfold like a city made of clay and gold. From up here, you can see the Tigris glittering in the distance, flanked by rows of date palms that look like commas in the desert sentence. You pause to catch your breath, because yes, even in ancient times, stairs were rude. Why are you up here? Not for the cardio. You're here because this is where the priests would come to double-check their readings. Liver omens were helpful, yes, but what if the clouds said otherwise? What if the winds were whispering a different story? That's where the sky signs came in. From the top of the ziggurat, priests, called bārû, would observe the heavens. They watched the color of the sunrise, the direction of early wind, the presence of mist or birds. Today, you see two older priests squinting toward the eastern sky, one holding a strip of bark as if trying to measure cloud motion, the other mumbling what sounds like either a hymn or a complaint about his sandals. There was a checklist, an actual list, inscribed on clay tablets, detailing which sky conditions confirmed or contradicted liver omens. If the liver said storm but the clouds said nope, well, guess who got sent back for a second sheep? Historians still argue whether these double checks were a form of quality control or simply symbolic. Either way, the system was thorough. Think of it like an ancient two-factor authentication. You couldn't just believe the guts, you needed the clouds to agree. One record tells of a priest who halted a royal procession because a liver reading predicted clear skies, but the morning breeze was too warm. He insisted it meant sudden rainfall. The king, annoyed but compliant, waited. By afternoon, a flash flood rolled in from the north. That priest got a promotion, or at least fewer dirty looks at temple brunch. There were debates, of course. Not every priest agreed on what misty sunrise or red streaks at dawn meant. One temple might say it was a sign of prosperity. Another might claim it heralded an outbreak of foot fungus among barley harvesters. This wasn't a science, it was a conversation. A divine Q&A session where the answers came slowly and occasionally, contradicted themselves. One delightful fringe theory from a modern scholar? That the Babylonian weather readers developed their own shorthand cloud shapes like proto-emojis. A wavy line for dust storms, a dot with 3 tail lines for northern wind. Nothing official has survived, but one tablet from Sippar shows a suspiciously doodle-like swirl next to the word unusual skies. As you watch the priests jot notes onto their wax boards, a breeze stirs your tunic and carries the faintest scent of cinnamon from the market below. It's a strange detail, but it reminds you how interconnected everything was. Weather signs didn't just tell farmers what to plant, they affected trade routes, baking schedules, even wedding dates. Imagine needing to check a sheep liver and cloud alignment just to set your anniversary, and the stakes were high. If the omens said flood, people moved. If they said famine, grain was hoarded. One mismatched reading could cause an entire district to panic buy chickpeas. There's a recorded case of a priest who insisted on clear skies for a royal festival, only for the heavens to open mid-speech. The rain didn't just ruin his prediction, it soaked the king's ceremonial beard extensions. They say the priest had to offer up 3 more sheep and sleep outside the temple gates for a week. Whether that's true or just an early form of tabloid gossip remains unclear. As you descend the steps again, your legs grateful for the downward angle, you glance back at the open sky. It looks innocent now, just a big pale dome with no opinions. But in Babylon, even silence from the heavens was something to be read. A quiet morning. That could mean peace or danger. Depends on how the sheep felt about it. By the time your sandals hit the courtyard, the temple is fully awake. Water carriers splash their buckets. A young acolyte chases a stray goat out of the herb garden, muttering something that sounds suspiciously modern.
And somewhere a priest begins to hum a low chant that seems to blend with the wind. You realize something as the day settles into rhythm. Weather wasn't just an inconvenience here, it was a living presence.
A god in disguise, a mood that the whole city tried to interpret. And so between livers and cloud wisps, between prayer chants and nervous scribes, the Babylonians crafted one of the oldest weather monitoring systems in the world. Was it accurate? Sometimes. Was it poetic? Always. You reach for your water skin and take a sip. The breeze ruffles your hair. And you wonder, was that a lucky gust? Better ask a sheep. You're still wiping the dust off your sandals when a temple aide, barefoot and breathless, grabs your arm and says, "They're bringing in a double-lobed one." You blink. "A what?" He grins, eyes wide. "A sheep with 2 liver lobes. A real split formation." Now that gets your attention. Double-lobed livers were rare. Rare enough that priests would drop their morning beer bread and come running, styluses still behind their ears. These weren't just biological quirks, they were cosmic punctuation marks. Divine exclamation points carved into sheep flesh. You follow the aide across the courtyard, dodging a basket of pomegranates and 2 arguing fishmongers, until you reach the sacrificial chamber. It's already buzzing. A priest carefully unwraps the animal's liver on a low, black stone altar. You can see the split shape immediately, like 2 cupped hands reaching away from each other. One side is smooth, the other has a jagged mark.
running down it almost like a bolt of lightning or a crack in an old bowl. The priest looks up and says very calmly, "We'll need to consult the compendium." Ah, yes, the compendium of omens. Babylonian priests didn't just wing it when
it came to weird organs. They had a full catalogue known as the bārû, packed with over 10,000 recorded signs and their interpretations. Every unusual wrinkle, spot, groove, or discoloration had a corresponding entry. It's like an encyclopedia, but all the pages are about sheep. The compendium says a split lobe could signal division between kingdoms, families, or even gods. But context mattered. Was the split clean or messy? Was there a cyst near the gallbladder? Did the smell of the liver shift during the reading? Yes, even odour had meaning. You really couldn't afford to have a cold in this profession. Historians still argue whether the compendium was ever standardized. Some tablets from Mari list completely different meanings for the same mark. In one, a blue-veined right lobe means famine. In another, it predicts abundant fig harvests. Depends who your deity of the week was, apparently. One fringe theory, that some priests fudged the readings to align with royal hopes. After all, it's easier to win favour by predicting successful military conquest than your chariot breaks down in enemy territory. A bit of theatrical optimism never hurt anyone, unless your king happened to be cranky and well-armed. But back to your current situation. The head priest runs a steady finger along the liver's split, then dips a reed into black ink and makes a mark on a wax slab shaped like a liver diagram. The room holds its breath. Outside you hear a parrot squawk and a merchant loudly offer 3 cucumbers for a silver shekel. It is, the priest declares, a sign of divided loyalties, possibly concerning the western border. The scribes nod sagely and begin recording. You suspect they would nod no matter what was said, just to keep the drama alive. The liver is placed into a clay bowl, later to be buried with reverence, because even split signs deserve respectful endings. And the message is dispatched. A messenger sprints off toward the palace, his sandals slapping the cobblestones like a fish in a panic. You ask the nearest priest whether double-lobed readings often came true. He shrugs. Only when someone's listening. There's a quiet humour in that. In a city ruled by interpretation, truth becomes a matter of collective agreement. The gods may or may not speak through sheep organs, but the city listens, and that gives the signs their power. You decide to linger in the chamber for a moment. The stones underfoot are cool. The air smells of myrrh and freshly turned clay. A boy enters with a broom made from bundled reeds and begins sweeping, pausing every so often to glance at the liver as if expecting it to twitch. Nearby, a lesser priest mutters to himself, flipping through a tablet listing uncommon features and appropriate seasonal responses. Apparently, if the split lobe occurs during a north wind, it signifies a royal misunderstanding. If during a south wind, it's a healing of alliances. Today's wind, east by northeast, he sighs, no entry. That's the thing about Babylonian
divination. It wasn't about quick answers. It was about the dance, a conversation between mortal logic and divine ambiguity. A priest might spend hours balancing one omen against another, reading them like overlapping dreams. One famous case
involved a split-lobed liver, a red sunrise, and a 3-legged goat seen near the city gates, all in the same day. The final verdict? Reform your grain taxes and avoid seafood. No one quite knows why, but apparently it worked. The floods held off, and the city's beer quality improved for a month. You glance once more at the divided liver now resting, silently in its bowl. It doesn't look dangerous, just different. Yet in this world, difference itself is loaded with possibility. As you step outside again, the sky is changing, clouds beginning to form low and slow, like lazy giants on a stroll. You wonder what the priests will say about that later. Will they confirm the liver's warning of discord? Or find something new in the shape of the shadows? Whatever they choose, one thing is certain. The reading is done, but the interpretation
is just beginning. You walk on, liver visions behind you, sky signs ahead.
The day stretches long and slow, like honey dripping from a reed spoon. You find yourself meandering through the scholarly quarter of Babylon, a maze of dusty courtyards, sun-warmed scroll cases, and the occasional goat who thinks it lives here. This is where the real brainy types dwell. The scribes, the astrologers, and the clerks who record every twitch of the heavens, every goat birth, and yes, every notable liver shape. Today, you're here for something slightly different. The clay, archives of omen patterns. It turns out that the Babylonians weren't content with just reading a liver and calling it a day. No, they like to track things. Over decades, centuries, which omens appeared before good harvests? Which liver quirks coincided with plague outbreaks? They made spreadsheets before Excel was cool. Only theirs weighed about 10 pounds and shattered if dropped. You duck into a modest room filled with pigeonholes and wooden shelving, each slot cradling a palm-sized tablet, most no thicker than your thumb. The air smells like old beeswax and dry dust, with a faint undertone of burnt cedar. A young scribe waves without looking up. His hands are busy tracing a cuneiform symbol with a stylus, tongue sticking out in concentration. You wander to the section marked Tupu Mudutu, omens confirmed by later events. It's basically a best hits collection of prophecies that came true, written and archived to prove that the gods still paid attention. Sort of like an ancient Yelp page for divine communication. One tablet catches your eye. It reads, "On the 4th day of the barley moon, the liver was cracked and the gallbladder was dry. Rain came 5 days later, and the southern canal flooded." A little note beneath it says, "Prediction verified by the flood keeper of Nippur, praise be." You can't help but smile. Imagine the flood keeper, soaked to the knees, yelling, "Told you so," while his ox cart floats away. But not all records are celebratory. Some are cautious, even apologetic. One entry states, "Split lobe with sundog at dawn, predicted locusts. No locusts arrived. Sheep possibly misaligned." Yes, even sheep placement was a consideration. If you rotated the animal incorrectly before the cut, it might confuse the gods. There were debates about optimal sheep orientation, head north or tail west. Historians still argue whether this was spiritual geometry or just obsessive clerical behavior. Fringe tidbit time. One renegade priest from Eridu allegedly began placing his sheep sideways, diagonally even, claiming the gods appreciated a fresh perspective. His temple was mysteriously struck by lightning the following year. Coincidence? Probably. But the sideways sheep method didn't catch on. You sit for a moment on a low bench carved with tiny lion paws, gently running your fingers over one, particularly cracked tablet. It details 3 consecutive liver readings before a major eclipse. Each one had a darkened lobe, a bloated gallbladder, and an unusual bump called a prophet's knot. And sure enough, the scribes report moon swallowed by darkness, citizens uneasy, bakers report low bread rise. The patterns weren't always perfect, but the Babylonians tried. They believed meaning lived in the repetition, in the recurrence of symbols. The more data, the more clarity. It was comforting, this idea that chaos could be catalogued. Modern scholars, of course, take this with a grain of salt the size of a temple cornerstone. There's no hard proof that liver omens caused anything, but that's not really the point, is it? It wasn't about proving causality, it was about feeling prepared, finding a thread to hold in the vast tangle of existence. And there's something undeniably cozy about that, like keeping a dream journal or checking your horoscope even when you don't believe in Mercury being retrograde. You lean back and glance at a painted mural along the far wall. It shows a procession of priests, each holding a liver in both hands like an offering. Behind them, a huge celestial wheel turns, stars, clouds, and flames all intermingling. At the center is a sheep, calm and radiant, its eyes closed, as if listening to something you can't hear. You wonder what it was like being that sheep. Probably confusing. From the hallway, someone calls out for a delivery tablet. Apparently, a new batch of sacrificial sheep just arrived, and someone needs to mark down their oat consumption. The bureaucracy never sleeps. One old priest shuffles past, holding a broken stylus and muttering about missing the golden age of omens. He stops, notices you, and says, "Don't trust the ones with tiny livers, too tricky." You nod solemnly as though you've personally been betrayed by a particularly small organ. Before you leave the archives, you pass a wall niche with a curious inscription. The gods speak often, but never twice the same way. Beneath it is a crude sketch of a liver, with 3 dots and a triangle, perhaps someone's private symbol, a signature in the margins of heaven. You step outside into the afternoon haze. The sun is gentle now, filtered through high clouds like pale silk. There's a calm in the air, as if the city itself is between breaths. You wonder how many livers have passed through these walls, how many prophecies, failed and fulfilled, sit buried beneath the streets. And you realize something simple, but oddly satisfying. For all their cracks, lumps, and knots, those sheep livers gave people hope. A bit of guidance, a whisper of understanding. You
stroll on, the past clinging gently to your heels like warm dust.
The street is busier now. Vendors hawking pomegranate wine, a pair of boys chasing each other with fishtails, and a travelling musician plucking at a lyre with only 2 strings left. You dodge a jug cart and wind your way back toward the temple district, where something curious is unfolding, a training session for novice diviners. You pause at the edge of a shaded courtyard. Stone benches form a semicircle, and at the center stands a teacher, a wiry priest with a sun-creased face and the calm expression of someone who's read way too many livers. Around him, 5 younger students sit cross-legged, each holding a clay slab and stylus. "Now," the teacher says with the gentle authority of a well-fed tortoise, "what does it mean when the processus pyramidalis is longer than the processus posterior?" One student furrows her brow, mutters something about storm omens, and scratches furiously at her tablet. Another shrugs and offers victory in battle if there are no boils on the right lobe. The priest nods. Acceptable, but only if it's autumn. In spring, that same formation means betrayal during a feast. You quietly settle in behind a pillar and watch. The lesson continues, part anatomy class, part theological debate, part improvisational riddle contest. There's something oddly endearing about it, like watching teenagers learn to interpret tea leaves with deadly seriousness. What stands out is how much of the training involves memorizing the bārû, the immense omen archive you saw earlier. Students were expected to recite entire sequences from memory, complete with variations. If you couldn't remember at least 5 liver-to-storm correspondences by your second year, you were gently nudged toward another career, perhaps counting barley or mending sandals. Historians still argue whether this priestly education was standardized or wildly local. Some tablets suggest schools exchanged teachings across cities. Others show dramatically different symbols for the same liver feature. One bump in Lhasa was considered a sign of divine favor. The same bump in Uruk, impending family disgrace. Talk about mixed signals, and yet there's consistency in the chaos. The symbols may vary, but the seriousness remains. These weren't party tricks. Liver reading was a sacred science. The students treated it with reverence, if sometimes spiced with a bit of competitive side-eye. You catch a snippet of whispering from two students, debating whether a forked gallbladder vein means two roads diverging, or just poor sheep hydration. One pulls out a tiny wax model of a liver used for practice. It's pocked with dots, ridges, and tiny holes marked in red ink. You're delighted to learn these models were widespread. Some were made of wax, others of clay or even bronze. Think of them as the original anatomical training aids. Imagine trying to remember 32 distinct zones without a cheat sheet shaped like an organ. No thank you. One fringe tidbit here. A Babylonian joke tablet, once found near a student dormitory, featured a cartoonishly oversized liver with the caption, "Signs unclear, try again with fatter sheep." Yes, even ancient priest kids made dumb anatomy jokes. Back in the courtyard, the priest quizzes the students on rare omens. What if the liver is speckled and the caudate lobe curls inward like a hook? A student hesitates. Premature wheat spoilage? The priest frowns gently. No, that's for when the hook is to the left. This one's to the right. The girl sighs and adjusts her stylus grip like a warrior resheathing a sword. You marvel at how much interpretation hinges on such minute details, millimeters of difference, a shadow in the wrong place. It makes you think about how little control people had and how much they tried to invent, meaning from meat, hope from pattern, and the training wasn't only academic. Students also practiced the art of the reading itself, the tone of voice, the calm delivery, no stuttering during a liver consult, thank you very much. The gods might be offended. You watch as one boy stands before a mock audience, 2 sheep, statues, and a distracted goat, and delivers a solemn proclamation. The liver is round at the base. The omens are favorable for trade with Dilmun. He bows. The goat snorts. Everyone applauds. Later, the priest dismisses the class with a reminder to study their nocturnal wind and liver correlations. You're not even sure what that means, but it sounds like a thrilling bedtime read. As the students file out, some chatting, others grumbling about memorization, one lingers near you. A gangly teen with ink-smudged fingers and a clay liver tucked under his arm. He notices you watching and says, "My uncle says this is all goat dung, but he also predicted rain last week and got soaked, so..." You nod. "Stick with the liver, it's squishier but smarter." He laughs and you both watch the sunset crawl across the rooftops. The education system may seem strange to modern eyes, but it worked. It created generations of priests who knew how to listen to the gods, to the city, and to the strange language of organs. They carried these teachings like heirlooms, whispered from teacher to student in courtyards just like this. And the sheep, bless them, kept providing the messages. You leave as the shadows lengthen and the sky begins to taste like copper. Somewhere, a flute plays a 3-note tune over and over. The clay liver practice model bounces lightly in the boy's hands as he disappears into the alley. Tomorrow, he'll be back to learn what happens when the duct is twisted. But tonight, He sleeps, with livers dancing in his dreams. The night in Babylon hums softly. Not with traffic or electronics, those don't exist, of course, but with a tapestry of sandals on stone, distant flute melodies, and the faint splash of someone washing figs in a clay basin. You've wandered into a quieter part of the city now, where most folks are asleep or mumbling to their gods beneath reed canopies. You pass through an alley lined with homes whose windows flicker with oil lamps. One house in particular smells like burned sage and sheep fat, a sure sign of a personal liver reading in progress. You pause, intrigued. Inside, a small domestic altar glows with candlelight. A middle-aged man crouches next to a sheep carcass, liver already removed and laid on a flat slate. His wife watches from a stool, hands folded tightly, and a teenage daughter peeks nervously from behind a curtain. This is not an official temple ritual. This is private haruspicy, folk-level divination done at home, away from the big rituals.
Untrained priests. And it's surprisingly common. Most people couldn't afford a full-time diviner.
Instead, they learned just enough to perform quick omens themselves, or paid a neighborhood expert who knew someone in the temple. You know how it goes. My cousin saw a gallbladder once, and now he reads weddings. The man mutters a prayer to Shamash, god of truth, then begins the reading. You recognize some of his gestures, pointing at the processus pyramidalis, tracing a line with a reed, shaking his head at an irregular vein cluster. It's a humble performance, but sincere. Eventually he turns to his wife and says, "The lobe is full and warm. The journey should be safe if you wait until the third day." She exhales, relieved, or merely less confused, it's hard to tell. You step away, leaving them to their quiet decisions. Folk divination was about more than prophecy. It was a form of comfort. When the world felt unpredictable, a squishy organ offered a plan, however murky. Historians still argue whether this grassroots liver reading was officially sanctioned or quietly tolerated. Temple priests may have scoffed, but no one seemed to stop it. People need reassurance, after all, and there's no monopoly on hope. You keep walking past another home where a child is giggling over a toy liver. Yes, those existed too, made of soft wax marked with tiny dots. They were sometimes gifted to children of scribes as both playthings and training tools. Imagine giving your kid a squishy organ replica and saying, "Sweet dreams." Fringe tidbit, one recovered letter from a Babylonian merchant complains that his son keeps using the liver doll to flatten bread. This was probably not considered appropriate prophetic behavior. The deeper into the night you go, the more layered the city becomes. Over one mud brick wall you hear an old woman reciting omens aloud, perhaps testing her memory or blessing her house. If the left lobe is darker than the right, misfortune hides behind the guest, she mutters. Charming. Around another corner you find something truly fascinating. A traveling healer's cart stacked with medicinal herbs, worn papyrus, scrolls, and a series of illustrated livers etched onto thin leather. This is an herbalist diviner combo, someone who reads organs and prescribes willow bark for headaches. She nods politely as you pass. "I also do dreams and bee stings," you nod back. "I'll keep that in mind." The cultural overlap between medicine and divination was substantial. The liver wasn't just a weather report, it was the body's command center. Babylonians believed it stored the soul, channeled emotion, and revealed disease. So reading a liver could just as easily be about someone's health as their destiny. One tablet you remember seeing in the archives said, "If the gall duct is blocked, the man's house is troubled." Modern scholars debate whether house meant family or, digestion. You sit for a while on the edge of a dry fountain and watch the sky darken from plum to obsidian. stars begin to appear, bright, steady, strangely familiar. Babylonians didn't separate astrology from liver divination. They saw both as part of a cosmic script, with omens written in light and flesh alike. Above you, the constellation known as the sheep enclosure flickers to life. Somewhere in a high tower, a priest is probably noting its position, correlating it with a reading from earlier today. Maybe it matches, maybe it doesn't. Either way, the record will be made. And back in that small house, the man will sleep easier, knowing he's at least tried to understand the will of the gods. There's something beautifully human about that. The idea that we can interpret the universe through its patterns, even if the medium is a liver on a flat stone. You yawn, not from boredom, but from the soothing rhythm of this ancient place. Every detail, every whisper, every flickering lamp feels part of the same eternal conversation. People listening, people hoping, people making sense of shadows. You rise and continue your stroll, footsteps muffled by the cool dust. Somewhere, in the distance, a rooster crows prematurely. It doesn't mean anything, or maybe it does, if only you had a sheep liver on hand. The night air is thick with sandalwood smoke and distant lullabies. You're in the outer district now, where brick meets garden, and sheep outnumber scribes. A quiet place, fewer temples, more earth. But make no mistake, even here, the business of omens thrives. You wander past a goat tethered to a fig tree and spot something curious in the distance, a small, fenced grove with a banner fluttering lazily in the wind. It's marked with the symbol of Gula, goddess of healing. That's your clue. You've arrived at the edge of a diviner's sanctuary, not quite a temple, not quite a clinic, something in between. Here, the priests of modest means work in tandem with shepherds, midwives, and weather watchers. And their specialty? Field readings, rural haruspicy. You hear murmurs and follow them into the grove, where a group has gathered. Beneath a woven canopy, a modest altar sits to one side. A sheep lies on its side nearby, calm, sedated, blessed. This is a practical reading, requested by a farmer worried about the rain. Not whether it will come, but how soon. You slip onto a bench as the local diviner begins. He's a sunburned man with kind eyes and a very impressive nose. His hands are steady. You've seen this ritual before, but out here it feels more intimate. No stone walls, just night sky and rustling leaves. The sheep's liver is removed with care and placed on a clay board etched with guiding lines. Think of it like a Babylonian cutting mat. The priest studies it, running his fingers along the major landmarks, the lobe, the umbilical notch, the palace section that allegedly holds weather signs. He looks up and smiles faintly. The forked groove on the posterior process is deep. That means heavy rain within 5 days, unless the gallbladder is pale. The gallbladder is not pale. 3 days then, he says, with a satisfied nod. The farmer exhales, slaps his thigh and mutters something about needing to finish the barley threshing before the mud comes. This might all seem quaint. Weather, forecasting by organ squiggle, but it worked more often than not. Why? Because the priests weren't fools. They were also careful observers. If the wind changed or the sheep's diet shifted, it registered in the liver. Modern science calls that correlation. The Babylonians called it fate. Historians still argue whether these field readings were backed by temple authority or considered the realm of freelance spiritual entrepreneurs. But they were undeniably respected. Many rural omens made their way into the great bārû archive, carried back by scribes with dusty sandals and anecdotes like, "We saw 3 livers like this, and each time the canal flooded." You watch the farmer offer thanks, 3 figs, and a bit of barley paste, and trudge off, mumbling about tools he forgot to sharpen. The diviner stays behind and begins to clean his blade in a stream nearby. You walk beside him, and he casually says, "Most of the time the liver's right, but every so often it gets clever." He taps his temple, like it knows we're watching. You both laugh, and he adds, "One time, I saw a mirrored fissure and told a man his twins would marry each other. Turns out they just married other twins. Still got my figs, though." You sit together on a flat rock by the water. The stream gurgles softly, like the liver itself is whispering in reverse. He pulls a tablet from his satchel and jots down a short note about the reading, not for official records, just for his own log. That's another quiet truth of Babylonian haruspicy. It wasn't always for kings or temples. Sometimes it was just one person helping another. And every reading, no matter how humble, was a thread in the city's spiritual web. Fringe tidbit. One old tablet refers to a wandering woman diviner who used only half a liver, insisting it held more concentrated omens. Most scholars assume it was satire, but then again, the satire survived. You lie back now on the cool earth. Above, stars tremble against the dark. The bull of heaven glows faintly in the eastern sky. It's peaceful here. No royal decrees, no thunderous chants. Just liver signs, rainfall predictions, and the quiet, odd comfort of a system older than calendars. You begin to understand why people trusted it. Not because it was foolproof, but because it listened. To sheep, to sky, to nerves and intuition. The diviner leans back, tossing a pebble into the stream. "You ever dream about livers?" he asks casually. You grin. "More and more lately." "Good," he says, closing his eyes. "Means you're paying attention." He dozes off. You stay a little longer, letting the sounds of water and wind and far-off sheep lull you into something close to sleep. In a world without radar or climate models, the Babylonians made do. And in doing so, they built a language of trust, a way to say, "I see the signs. I understand. You'll be okay." That language, written in lobes and veins and faint discolorations, still echoes under the stars. You hear it now, if only faintly. The early morning light is beginning to bloom, gentle and golden, casting long shadows across the baked earth and stirring the city's breath once more. But you're still adrift in the quiet folds of the night, wrapped in stories and sheep. Organs watching history hum to life. Your path bends back toward the city's heart now, where temple towers poke the sky like giant clay fingers. You move through narrow alleyways that seem half asleep, past shuttered food stalls and faintly steaming bread ovens. The scent of baked dates and goat milk warms the air. Then unexpectedly, you hear a voice. Raspy, amused. "Looking for trouble?"
Or just omens? You turn and find a man perched on a doorstep, tuning a one-string instrument. He's missing 3 teeth and has an earring shaped like a fishhook. "I read livers once," he says, tapping his chest. "Back when the king's
Hair was still black. This is your first encounter with a retired diviner. And he's got stories. He pats the stone beside him and you sit, legs stretched out. The city slowly wakes around you as he talks. "I started as a scribe, you know. Spent 6 years just drawing. Liver lines on clay. Over and over, they said, if you can't carve a gallbladder blindfolded, you'll never make it. I could do it with my toes by year 4. You laugh. He doesn't. That was a serious challenge. As dawn spills across the rooftops, he pulls a small tablet from under his robe. It's chipped at the edges but still legible. "This one," he says, "was my favorite reading. There was a cloudburst, a market fire, and a fish falling from the sky. The liver showed all of it, beautiful central nodule, like a pearl." You try to picture a fish falling from the sky and nearly succeed. Historians still argue whether these kinds of elaborate readings, where one liver predicts multiple events, were accurate memory or priestly embellishment. Some think the fish was just slang for something else. Others suggest it was literal. Babylon had some wild weather. The retired diviner continues. "You know what no one tells you? The liver's smell tells you just as much as the shape. Sweet means luck, sour means deceit, bitter means..." He pauses. "Well, I'll let you guess." "Bad love poetry?" you offer. He chuckles. "Exactly." There's a wisdom in his posture, a peace, like someone who spent enough time peering into organs that he now sees the world in cross-sections and soft tissue. He tells you that when he retired, he gifted his knife to a young apprentice and now spends his days telling riddles to pigeons. Fringe tidbit. Some elderly diviners believed their accuracy increased with age, not due to wisdom, but because their dreams became clearer. One even claimed that by age 70, he could predict a lunar eclipse just by sneezing in his sleep. The man shifts and sighs. "You know, I once read a liver that had no marks at all. Clean as a polished gem. No nodules, no shadows, not a single
vein out of place." "You'd think that meant peace, right?" You nod. He shakes his head. "It meant nothing. The gods said you don't need to know." And that was scarier than any curse.
The light creeps higher and you realize the streets are beginning to fill, quietly, slowly. A market vendor arranges pickled onions beside lotus flowers. A mother swats a rooster off her laundry line. The city is returning to its rhythms. You stand, stretch, and the man waves you off. "Go find your signs," he says, "but don't trust a liver that's too quiet." You take that to heart. As you walk, you remember how central aging diviners were to their communities, like sages, with stained robes and sharp memories. They offered not just omens, but interpretation, life advice wrapped in entrails. They knew how to calm a panicked bride, or advise a soldier, or soothe a king without revealing too much. The most respected ones weren't the flashiest. They were the ones who read quietly, slowly, thoughtfully, who admitted when a liver gave no clear answer. Because not every moment demands a prophecy. Some just want a story. You pass another home where someone is boiling herbs in a copper pot. The smell drifts out, lavender, fennel, a hint of crushed olives. An old recipe to soothe bad dreams, or maybe to induce a good one. It's easy to see how the lines blurred between healer, seer, counselor, and neighborhood eccentric. All of it folded into the soft language of the liver. Above, temple bells ring low and long, a shift change among the priesthood perhaps, or maybe a rain warning. If only you had a sheep handy, but maybe you don't need one now. Maybe, like the old man said, there are signs everywhere if you're paying attention. You pause at a crossroads, watching the sun skim across the brickwork. A fig falls from a nearby tree, landing soundlessly on the dirt. Not a prophecy, just gravity. Or is it? You wander farther now, tracing the edges of the city's rhythm as it wakes fully. The sun has climbed high enough to bleach the tops of walls and glint off polished obsidian jewelry in the shop windows of the scribal quarter. But your path veers sideways toward the outskirts again, toward the place they call the House of Learning Winds. Despite the lofty name, it's really a rectangular mud brick hall tucked between a granary and a goat pen. But inside is where it happens, training the next generation of diviners, not in secrecy, but in slow, steady mentorship. You step through the shaded doorway and are greeted by the musty perfume of reed scrolls, sheep grease, and fresh clay. A group of boys, some barely tall enough to hold a stylus, are clustered around a long table where a dissected sheep liver rests like a dusty map of a foreign land. A senior priest, his robes neat but stained at the sleeves, holds a pointer. "Now," he says patiently, "tell me again, what do we call this?" He taps the upper lobe. A hesitant hand rises. "The throne of the storm god." "Close," he says. "That's the poetic name. The technical term is the dorsal lobe, but yes, storms do tend to hide there." You slip into a corner to observe. This is where the craft begins, not in temples, not in sacred groves, but in classrooms like these. Here, the students memorize more than 150 specific signs. Each mark or bulge or crease has a name, a meaning, a history. Learning them takes
years, and that's just the surface layer. The priest turns to a wax tablet and draws a crude outline of a liver. Now, what if the gallbladder is swollen and the palace is scarred? One student whispers, "That means a foreign invasion."
Another adds, "only if the duodenum is also rigid." "Good," the priest nods. "And if it's not?" "Then it means a domestic uprising." You feel yourself smile. It's oddly comforting, watching them piece it all together like a jigsaw puzzle made of meat and metaphor. Fringe tidbit. Some classrooms used carved wooden livers instead of real ones, complete with interchangeable omen inserts. Like an ancient version of a toy liver, snap in the nodule, read the fate. Hands-on learning at its finest. The lesson moves on. They study symmetry next. The priest flips the liver gently, revealing its underside. See the twin grooves here? If one is deeper, that's imbalance. If both are deep, it's impending change. Like marriage, a boy suggests, or death, another mutters. Or, the priest adds with a grin, just a very confusing harvest. Historians still debate whether these omen interpretations were rigidly followed or adapted over time by senior priests with enough authority to reinterpret old signs. The bārû listed standard meanings, yes, but real diviners often improvised, trusting gut instinct as much as anatomy. One teacher's storm might be another's bad barley taxes. As the lesson winds down, the students begin copying signs onto clay tablets. You peek over their shoulders. Some are precise, others wildly creative. One boy has drawn what appears to be a liver with a tiny sword sticking out of it. You raise an eyebrow. He grins. "A warrior liver," he says proudly. You let it slide. You're struck by how much this resembles any school anywhere. Sloppy handwriting, nervous questions, a hint of rebellion. And yet here they're training to read fate. The priest calls for a break, and the students scatter, some to play stickball outside, others to sneak chunks of honey bread from their satchels. You step out into the sunlight again, marveling at how much was invested in this ancient education, not just in techniques, but in temperament. Diviners were expected to be calm under pressure, good with people, endlessly curious. The liver was only one tool in their emotional toolkit. It's said that part of the final exam for a diviner in training involved reading a deliberately ambiguous liver in front of a small audience. If the candidate hesitated too long or contradicted himself, he failed. Not because he was wrong, but because he lacked the confidence to own uncertainty. You imagine these boys someday standing before generals, kings, or weeping mothers, delivering verdicts with soft voices and steady eyes, and you wonder how many sleepless nights did they spend memorizing the difference between a notched lobe and a puckered edge. You walk past the outer wall of the school, where faint etchings from former students remain, little spirals, short prayers, a sheep drawn with suspiciously human legs. It's all part of the lineage. You pause and run your hand over the wall. It's warm, rough, real. There's something beautiful about how knowledge was passed here, not in scrolls, but in breath and repetition, in gestures, in watching, in failing and trying again. And always, always listening to the sheep, the sky, and the silence between omens. You slip back into the winding alleys of Babylon with dust on your sandals and clay under your fingernails. The lesson you've just witnessed still hums in your mind, the patience, the precision, the quiet pressure of learning to read the gods through an organ no larger than your hand. But now, the city around you is shifting. The air thickens, the smell of rain, or is it wet bark, hovers faintly over the rooftops. Somewhere a pot cracks open in the sun, a donkey groans, and from high atop a ziggurat, the sound of a drum echoes once, twice, and then stops. Something's about to happen. You follow the sound to the temple district. Not the grand ones for public worship, but a smaller, enclosed garden, sacred to a goddess whose name you've already forgotten, something soft and full of S's. This is where experimental divinations take place. The fringe, the unofficial, the not yet approved. You pass through a set of linen-draped doorways, and there they are, 3 young diviners around a low altar, preparing to perform a non-liver omen ritual. You stay silent, blending into the shadows. One of them whispers, "We'll try the barley again. The last batch only sprouted mold." They spread out a shallow clay dish filled with damp earth and carefully press barley seeds into it, counting, aloud in unison. 1, 2, 3, 36? Then they place the dish near a small oil lamp and wait. This is lecanomancy, or bowl divination. If the seeds sprout quickly, it's a good omen. If they rot, well, time to schedule a flood drill. Fringe tidbit. In times of drought, some diviners would try to provoke faster results by singing lullabies to the seeds or whispering prayers directly into the soil, like soil therapy with a side of superstition. You lean closer, and one of the students notices you. "Want to try?" he asks, holding out a second dish. You nod. They hand you seeds that feel warm from the sun, and you press them gently into the earth. It feels oddly intimate, like planting.
Tiny secrets.
You place your bowl beside theirs and whisper something nonsensical, just to see what the soil does with it. While the barley does its slow work, the students shift to another experiment, oil divination. They drip olive oil into a shallow bowl.
Of water, and watch how it spreads. One drop forms a spiral, another turns cloudy, a third splits in half. "Split omen," one mutters.
Decision with 2 outcomes. Unless it's love, the other corrects. Then it's just regret. They all nod solemnly. You stifle a chuckle. Historians still debate how widespread these alternative forms of divination were. Some argue they were part of formal training, while others believe they were personal methods used when livers were scarce or secrecy was required. The truth, as always, likely sways somewhere in between. A priestess arrives then, older, barefoot, with
Arms dusted in ochre.
She says nothing, but inspects each bowl, each seed, each droplet of oil. Her face remains unreadable. When she reaches your bowl, she pauses. Then she whispers something into her palm, scatters a pinch of powdered resin over your seeds, and moves on. You feel oddly blessed, or maybe just weirdly moisturized. Later, the students gather around a cracked tablet covered not in writing, but in carved symbols, snakes, stars, a bird mid-flap. It's an ancient chart of omens and their possible meanings. They take turns, pointing at symbols and inventing new interpretations. If the owl lands at dusk, your rival will forget your name. If you dream of 3 mangoes, your mother-in-law is lying. It's part game, part study, and entirely mesmerizing. They let you try. You point to a spiral and say, "You'll lose your shoe, but find your dignity." They nod with pretend seriousness. "Very likely," one says. You realize then that divination was never only about fear or warning, it was a cultural glue, a way to make sense of confusion, a form of storytelling dressed in ritual robes. As the sun dips lower, casting long amber beams through the hanging cloth, you notice your barley seeds. One has cracked. A fragile white sprout pokes through, uncertain and soft. The students cheer softly. "That's a good sign," they agree. You don't know what it means, but it feels like a whisper from the earth itself. Later, as you leave the garden, one of the students calls after you. "Remember, the gods speak many languages, not all of them loud." You nod and keep walking. The garden fades behind you, and with it, the whispered oaths, the barley bowls, the patient oil drops. You're back in the city proper now, where the scent of fried onions mingles with incense smoke, and the streets glow with the last of the golden light. You pass a group of children tossing pebbles into a fountain and declaring their futures, based on how many rings the splash makes. One gets 2 ripples and shrugs. "Guess I'm marrying a camel trader." The other nods gravely. "May the camels be gentle." And that, really, is the charm of Babylonian divination. Beneath all the ritual and record-keeping and sheep anatomy diagrams, it's just people trying to understand the chaos of life, using whatever tools they can hold. Sometimes that's a stylus, sometimes that's a sprouting seed, and sometimes it's just the hope that tomorrow will make a little more sense than today. The air is cooler now. You cross back toward the temple square where evening prayers have already begun. The great braziers are lit, casting flickering halos over the priests as they chant in rhythm, low, measured syllables that feel more like
breathing than singing. The smell of cedar smoke drifts over the rooftops and clings to your tunic. But you aren't stopping here. You keep walking, drawn toward the riverbank.
toward the last piece of this weather-watching puzzle, because while sheep livers and barley bowls might predict storms in metaphor, there's another group in Babylon working to forecast the literal kind, the temple astronomers. You arrive just as the stars are beginning to appear in the bruised purple sky. The observatory is simple, a flat rooftop with a wide view and a few marked stones for reference, but it hums with quiet concentration. A young man in long robes sits cross-legged with a stylus and wax tablet, charting positions in the fading light. He doesn't look up when you approach. "Northwest horizon," he mutters. One faint twin. Second, still hidden. Cloud cover, medium-high, westerly drift. Another priest murmurs nearby. "Write it down. If it repeats tomorrow, we add it to the tablet. This is no stargazing party, it's systematic. And believe it or not, it's connected to the livers. The Babylonians didn't just cut into sheep and call it magic. They compared, they correlated. If a certain liver shape coincided with a cloud pattern or a phase of Venus, they took note. Over time, patterns emerged. This, right here, is early data science, with lamb guts and stars. Mainstream fact: the Babylonians kept meticulous sky records for centuries, and their lunar calculations were so accurate that later Greek astronomers borrowed heavily from them. They even created arithmetic algorithms to predict eclipses long before such things were considered scientific. You sit beside the scribe and glance at his tablet. It's a blend of symbols and numbers, small circles, wedges, marks for wind direction and cloud shape. Every night they track star visibility, wind speed, and weather, then compare it to past omens, especially those drawn from liver readings. "See this?" he says, finally acknowledging you. He points to a column of numbers. 17 consecutive nights with hazy stars, matched with 5 swollen gallbladders. Then a plague hit the east quarter. You raise an eyebrow. "Correlation doesn't mean causation," you murmur, though your modern self knows better than to argue here. He shrugs. Tell that to the shepherds who lost their herds. And fair enough. Fringe tidbit. Some temple astronomers believed that each visible planet had a specific influence not just on kings or wars, but on the organs of sacrificed animals. Mars, for instance, was linked to lesions on the liver's edge. Jupiter, often associated with extra nodules. Modern science doesn't support this, but the records are oddly consistent. A nearby assistant adds fresh oil to a lamp as the senior priest begins chanting names of stars aloud, his voice like a lullaby dipped in sand. Each star is addressed as a being, not a ball of gas. Shining One, who measures time. Arrow of the western wind. He who sinks late. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. It's not just science or religion. It's a language, a rhythm. The stars speak, and the priests respond. Historians still argue whether the Babylonian practice of celestial divination was more mathematical or mystical. Some claim the astronomical tablets were purely observational, early weather logs. Others
insist they were used exclusively for omens. The likely truth?
a little of both, depending on who was watching and who was asking. A sudden gust rustles your tunic, a breeze from the west carrying the smell of distant rain. One of the junior scribes checks a clay wind gauge, a hollowed cone with feathered
reeds. The reeds tremble just slightly. Wind change, he murmurs. Another priest steps forward with a wax tablet and marks it. 8th day, western breeze, cool, sky, open to the south. You peer into the sky. The stars shimmer, tiny and
precise, no lightning yet, no thunderheads, but still there's a hush in the air. And now you understand. This isn't fortune-telling, it's a kind of faith. Not in magic, but in pattern, in observation. In the idea that if you look long enough, carefully enough, the world will reveal itself. You reach into your satchel and pull out a broken reed stylus you picked up near the school. You sketch a little swirl on the floor tile beside you, a spiral, just because. The young scribe sees it and nods approvingly. Storm symbol, he says, but in a friendly way, like a refreshing drizzle or a surprise day off. From temple chores, you both smile. Down below, the city murmurs into evening. A goat bleats, a woman laughs. The soft clack of pottery lids being set into place floats through the air. The stars lean closer, and so do you. As you sit with them, these
observers of liver and light, you realize they weren't predicting disaster. They were translating reality, offering comfort in code.
Finding shape in chaos, and isn't that what you're doing too, in your own strange way? You stretch your legs, yawn, and look up again. One final star appears, faint, blinking, almost shy. The priest nods. "Good omen," he says softly. "That one always arrives late, but never lies." You lie back, hands behind your head, and let the sky settle over you. The temple rooftop fades behind you like the tail end of a long, winding dream. You descend the steps slowly, like your body's gotten heavier with each lesson learned. Your knees creak a bit. Babylon has that effect. As your feet touch the street again, the city seems quieter than before. The market stalls have packed away their saffron and dried figs. Even the neighborhood cats are curled into statues. But up ahead, you spot a low flicker of firelight. One last destination calls to you. The scribe's house. Inside, rows of clay tablets line the walls like oversized bricks. It smells of damp stone, old oil, and something faintly metallic, like blood that's long since dried. A scribe looks up from his stylus as you enter. "Just in time," he says, and gestures to a blank slab on the table. "Time for the archive. This is where every liver reading, every storm, every barley sprout, every suspicious cloud formation is recorded, carefully, obsessively, and in the driest handwriting imaginable. Welcome to Babylon's version of a weather app, only in cuneiform and without any fun graphics." He hands you a stylus. You glance around nervously. The other scribes are watching with quiet amusement. "Go ahead," one says. "Write what you remember. So you begin. You start with the liver, the weight of it in your hands, the smell of salt and copper, the unexpected feeling of reverence. You trace the shape of the gallbladder as you saw it, swollen, trembling slightly under your touch. Then you move on to the sky. The veiled stars, the drifting clouds, the shy planet that blinked at you just before sleep. You draw a spiral. You're still not sure what it means, but it keeps following you. Mainstream fact: Babylonian scholars maintained libraries of omen tablets, some stretching back hundreds of years. These weren't casual notes. They were studied, copied, debated, and passed between cities. The most important ones were even engraved into stone, meant to survive floods, fires, and time itself. One tablet nearby reads, "If the liver is forked like a snake's tongue, and Mars is red at dawn, then the king's gate will be blocked by mud." Is it a warning, a metaphor, or just someone's way of making sense of chaos? You turn to the scribe beside you. "Do these ever change?" He shrugs. "We copy what works. We add what surprises us. The gods whisper in patterns, but the echoes aren't always the same." You nod slowly. Fringe tidbit. Some rare tablets even include self-doubt. One famous example reads, "The liver was cloudy. Interpretation unclear. Consult another sheep." That's the ancient equivalent of "try turning it off and on again." Another tablet records an eclipse that arrived early and caused massy panic. The note at the bottom: "Scribe wept, regretfully inaccurate." You feel oddly comforted by their honesty. Historians still argue whether these records were intended as immutable truths or as working documents, like scientific journals, rather than sacred scripture. The truth, as usual, is probably blurry. These scribes were archivists and poets, scientists and servants. They were trying to give future generations a fighting chance at understanding the wild, moody, inconvenient behavior of nature. And in that dim little room, you're part of that story now, too. You place your finished tablet on the rack to dry. No one comments. but one scribe gives a small nod, like you've passed a test you didn't know you were taking. Outside, night has finally taken full hold of the city. The moon, waning and gently dimpled, rises over the rooftops. You follow its pale glow back through the quiet streets, passing familiar landmarks now cloaked in moonlight. The school courtyard, empty. The barley garden, resting. Even the temple, now a silhouette of stillness. And as you walk, you start noticing things differently. A patch of rust-colored moss near a drain. Damp season approaching. The restless pacing of a dog under an awning. Change in barometric pressure. Even your own heartbeat seems synced to something larger, slower, rhythmic. You're not a diviner. You haven't memorized the signs or the symbols or the correct number
of barley sprouts, but you understand now in your own way what they were trying to do. They weren't just predicting weather.
They were reading the mood of the world, and maybe, just maybe, that's something you can still do if you're paying attention. You climb a final hill and find yourself looking down at the cityscape, twinkling with firelight and starlight.
A warm wind brushes past your face, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbles once, soft and sleepy. You close your eyes. And now, as the journey draws to a close,
your breathing slows. The city of Babylon fades behind your eyelids like a watercolor washing out under rain. You imagine the gentle crackle of distant torches, the soft footfall of sandals over worn stone, the whisper of reeds swaying by the Euphrates. That same breeze that once carried prayers and incense now carries you, weightless and still, like a clay tablet, cooling in the dark. The sheep are asleep. The priests have tucked away their styluses. Even the stars seem to blink slower now, like they're tired from watching over everything. You are no longer a traveler, no longer a scribe or a student or a curious outsider. You're simply still. Let the symbols blur, the omens drift like clouds, the clay dry, undisturbed. There is no need to interpret tonight.
No need to translate signs or name constellations. The storm will come when it comes. The seed will sprout or not. And that's okay, because in this moment, here, in this breath, you are held, just as the sky holds its stars, just as the priest
holds the liver, just as Babylon, in its dreaming dusk, holds its secrets without needing to explain them. So rest, wanderer. Let your thoughts quiet. Let your body soften. And let the night carry you wherever it may.